After just getting married, my wife and I plan to go to Paris for our honeymoon, enjoying some sweet time just the two of us. On the eve of our trip, I was busy packing the things we needed to take with us. My wife kept glancing at her phone and then at me, hesitating to say something. "Dear, why have you been so distracted all day?" I put down the luggage I was holding, feeling uneasy, and sat down next to my wife. "I've already arranged the flights and hotel, so there's no need to worry." However, hearing this only deepened her frown. "Honey, I need to discuss something with you." Suddenly, an uncomfortable feeling crept into my heart. My best friend wants to join us for the trip to Paris. What? We're on our honeymoon, why would we bring her along? I immediately rejected my wife's request. I could understand the friendship between them, but there should still be some boundaries, right? What kind of honeymoon trip involves 3 people? We agreed before that no matter who gets married first, we'll take each other on our honeymoon trips. My wife pouted in a soft tone. I was speechless. What kind of agreement was that? I still didn't relent. Just think about it, a honeymoon trip is likely a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and I didn't want anyone else involved. "Please, darling, my best friend won't be with us the whole time. Besides, we need someone to take photos for us along the way." My wife wrapped her arms around my neck and tried her best to persuade me. Her misty eyes looked at me with such affection that I quickly caved in. Even after agreeing to let my wife's friend join us, I still felt uneasy about it. Is it Su Ying or Huang Ling? I didn't hear the bridesmaids mention anything about this on the wedding day. I didn't know if I was wrong, but as soon as I finished speaking, a hint of unnaturalness appeared on my wife's face. Neither. My best friend was busy out of town on the day of the wedding, so she couldn't come back. You have a best friend I haven't met? After dating my wife for over a year, I practically knew all her good friends, whether they were single or married. You'll meet her tomorrow. My wife seemed eager to change the subject. I felt an inexplicable twitch in my eyelid. Little did I know what was waiting for me the next day. International airport. I was guessing in my mind about all the possible friends of my wife's that I might meet. But when we finally came face to face, I was taken aback. The good friend my wife talked about was a man. And he was taller than me, probably around 6'1", quite noticeable in the crowd. With striking features and a slightly delicate appearance, he had the kind of look that many girls favored. In terms of looks, this male friend definitely had the upper hand over me. As soon as they met, my wife dropped me and excitedly ran toward him. He opened his arms in a welcoming gesture. However, they didn't end up hugging in front of me. My wife just playfully punched her friend and laughed, while he naturally ruffled her hair. It was an incredibly doting and classic head pat move. I watched them closely, feeling like an outsider. After a while, my wife finally remembered my existence and pulled her friend's hand, introducing us with a smile. "Honey, this is my good friend I grew up with, Xie Chang." Xie Chang immediately joked, "Since when did I become your friend? I'm just a big guy." The two of them teased each other as if no one else was around, and it seemed to me like flirtation. "Hello, I'm Li Ming." I reached out to interrupt them. He was taken aback for a moment but reached out to shake my hand. "Dude, you need to keep an eye on her. Zhong Yao loves to have fun, she's just a young girl, so don't get mad at her." The Zhong Yao he mentioned is my wife. Hearing this, I felt a bit angry. It sounded like he was telling me not to interfere in my wife's life. My wife, seemingly unfazed, turned around and continued chatting with her male friend. Until we boarded and took our seats, I had bought 2 adjacent ones, but Xie Chang's seat was a bit far away. "Is this the good friend you were talking about?" I asked my wife beside me with a dark face. I wasn't at a stage where I could be okay with my wife having a close male friend with a normal sexual orientation. My wife casually replied and, seeing my bad mood, added an explanation. "We only have a pure friendship. I don't have any romantic feelings for him, and he feels the same way about me." "Honey, you're just too sensitive," my wife said, her expression open and honest. Could it be that I was overthinking? The honeymoon trip hadn't even started, and I was stuck at customs due to a documentation issue, unable to enter the country. It would take 4 or 5 days to resolve the paperwork. "Honey, I can't stay at the hotel. I just talked to Xie Chang. We'll hang out for a few days and wait for you in Paris, my wife said, playfully clinging to my arm. Their documentation was fine, so they could enter anytime. I still want to be with you. I really didn't want them to be alone together. Are you unwilling to let Zhong Yao go, or do you not trust her? Suddenly, Xie Chang chimed in with a laugh. A hidden knife in his smile made me realize immediately that he wasn't as friendly as he seemed. What chilled me was my wife's attitude. She looked at me in silence, seemingly questioning if I doubted their relationship. Just behave and wait for me in Paris. In the end, I conceded. During those few days stuck at the hotel, I knew my wife was with Xie Chang all day, exploring the streets and alleys of Paris. Every lunchtime, she would video call me to update me on their itinerary, sharing anything fun or delicious they encountered. Even though I wasn't physically with them, I was well aware of everything they did throughout the day. Because of that, even though I was uneasy about them being alone together, I couldn't find any concrete evidence to confront them with. On the third day of being isolated in the hotel, I was bored, scrolling through my phone in bed. I came across a social media post from my wife from yesterday. It was a normal caption, filled with many photos of the delicious food and scenery she had already shown me. Plus, there were some captivating selfies of her. Suddenly, a WeChat message popped up. It was from my good brother Zhu Hao. Hey, Li Ming, what's up with your wife? Just so happens Su Ying is sitting next to me and I saw it. He attached a screenshot of my wife's social media update. Today, she posted about their third day in Paris, but the middle photo was a close-up of my wife and Xie Chang, smiling closely together. I had scrolled for ages without seeing this post. Clearly, my wife had set it to be invisible to me. I felt completely duped. Zhu Hao sent another message. Is that guy your wife's brother? Brother mes foi. I vaguely explained the situation to him. After he learned what had transpired over the last few days, Zhu Hao subtly warned me, you're too trusting. They're all normal men, driven by desire. What wouldn't they do? At the end of the day, it was my fault for being too soft-hearted towards my wife. Even if she was unwaveringly loyal to me, what about Xie Chang? Did he really not harbor any feelings for her? I didn't dare think any further and quickly called my wife to video chat. She hung up immediately. I tried again. She hung up again. It was 9 at night. What could she be so busy with? Soon after, my wife sent a voice message, saying she was exhausted after playing all day and just wanted to sleep after her shower. I remembered she had said the same thing the last few nights. I hadn't thought much about it before. I just considered that she must be tired from all the fun, so I rescheduled our video call for the next afternoon. But now that I thought about it, the more it didn't sit right with me. My pent-up emotions finally burst, and I confronted her with the social media pictures, asking if she was with Xie Chang that evening. After about a minute, my wife called me on video. As soon as I answered, she kept apologizing, telling me not to overthink it. Honey, I didn't mean to. I was just afraid you'd misunderstand. Please believe me. I stared at her in silence through the camera, and to prove her innocence with Xie Chang, she walked around the hotel room with her phone, even showing me the bathroom, verifying she was truly alone. But in the fleeting image, I saw a man's jacket, which Xie Chang had worn upon entering the country. Could it be a coincidence? Distracted, I chatted with her for a bit before hanging up. That night, while lying in bed, I reflected on everything from the day, which stirred my suspicions even more. The next day, I became cautious and secretly completed the entry procedures without my wife knowing. I arrived in Paris at around 10 p.m. The hotel was booked under my name, and as her legal husband, I had no trouble getting the key from the front desk. However, the complex expression on the receptionist's face was something I would never forget. Soon enough, I finally understood why they looked at me that way. Holding the key, I quietly followed the room number and gently opened the door. I never expected to witness the scene that filled me with rage. There lay my wife and her so-called best friend, Xie Chang, disheveled and lying together on the bed. Anger completely took away my reason. I rushed forward and threw a punch at Xie Chang, immediately drawing blood. The panicked call of my wife rang in my ears, but I couldn't hear it at all. All I wanted was to beat up Xie Chang. One punch after another, each strike fierce and relentless. Xie Chang quickly reacted, and we started grappling with each other. He was taller than me, and using his size advantage, I soon found myself at a disadvantage. My lip was split, and I had taken a few hits. It was finally my wife who pulled us apart. Enough, Xie Chang. Stop it. My wife helped me up and worriedly asked if I was hurt. Stop pretending. You're both lying on the same bed, and you say you're just friends. I scoffed and shook off her hand. She looked surprised and blurted out, "We're living in the same room to save on rent. Nothing has happened." What a shameless excuse. They were caught in the act yet still lying. Believe me, husband, I swear I haven't done anything to betray you. I've always seen Xie Chang as just a friend. There are no romantic feelings at all. My wife was nearly in tears from desperation, but I remained unmoved. At that moment, Xie Chang said, "Dude, if we had feelings for each other, we would have been together by now. Why wait until now to cheat behind your back?" He spoke with such certainty, it seemed like he was telling the truth. Yeah, husband, if you don't believe me, go look for evidence. I scanned the room and didn't find any strange crumpled papers or used condoms. Coupled with my wife's straightforward attitude, I momentarily wavered in my conviction. Seeing my expression soften, my wife earnestly assured me that they were only sharing a bed and had not crossed any boundaries. As we went back and forth, the balance of trust once again tipped in favor of my wife. After all, we had known each other, fallen in love, and entered into marriage. My wife's love for me was evident. She truly loved me. This incident dampened my spirits during our honeymoon trip, and I returned home early without any desire to explore. After we returned from the honeymoon, my wife took care of me with warmth and affection, making me feel like we were back in those sweet early dating days. She was worried about my feelings, so she avoided any overly intimate actions with Xie Chang. Thus, the storm passed quietly. Only I knew that incident stuck in my throat like a thorn, causing occasional pain. In the more than half a month after the honeymoon, my wife and I hadn't been intimate even once. Whenever my wife tried to find opportunities for closeness with me, I would always recall the image of her being in the same room with her male friend, which invited all kinds of thoughts. Just the thought of that scene made me feel nauseous. I couldn't bring myself to share a bed with my wife without distractions. One night, after taking a shower, I saw my wife already lying in bed waiting for me. She climbed onto my neck, her fragrant shoulder partially exposed. In the past, I wouldn't have been able to resist. But at that moment, I instinctively avoided her kiss, leaving my wife looking perplexed. "I worked a lot today and I'm a bit tired. Let's go to bed early." I gave her cheek a comforting kiss. My wife wouldn't let it go. "Li Ming, you've been so distant these past few days. Do you not love me anymore? Stop talking nonsense. I've just been busy lately." I patiently soothed her, fully aware that I had intentionally been distancing myself from her during this time. Though I didn't say it out loud, there was already a rift between my wife and me. We lay in the same bed, yet each of us harbored our own secrets. I didn't want to go home early to face my wife. I made an excuse about working overtime and went to a bar to drown my sorrows. Unexpectedly, I ran into my buddy Zhu Hao. "What kind of trouble are you in? Tell me about it." Zhu Hao noticed that I was gulping down drink after drink and sensed that I was in a bad mood. He asked while preventing me from pouring more alcohol. Because of the liquor, I just wanted to vent and talk about everything that happened during our honeymoon all at once. By the end, Zhu Hao suggested in a rare serious tone that I check my wife's phone. "Your suspicions may be correct. If things can't go on, just divorce her. If it turns out she's cheating, she's the one at fault in the marriage. Although you might not walk away with nothing, at least you can strive to maximize your own benefits." Zhu Hao was a lawyer and analyzed the pros and cons of my situation for me. After a few drinks, he patted my shoulder and said, "If you don't find anything, just focus on living your life. Don't worry too much." His words might have been rough, but they made sense. I realized that rather than letting my imagination run wild, it was better to find out the truth. My wife's movements were quite predictable. She would go from home to her company in a straight line, And on her days off, she'd go out shopping and getting manicures with her girlfriends. She didn't like me checking her phone and carried it around everywhere, so I rarely had the chance to look at it. After a few days, I finally found an opportunity. My wife went into the bathroom to take a shower, and her phone was charging in the room. I secretly memorized the password she used to unlock it. I opened her WeChat and found Xie Chang's chat box. I felt relieved. There were no explicit or inappropriate chat records. On the contrary, everything was quite clean. I checked everywhere I could think of. WeChat, even the rarely used QQ and Alipay. I unexpectedly found something in the photo album. I saw a picture of a pregnancy test on my wife's phone, taken 2 weeks ago, with 2 lines. My wife is pregnant? I was a bit stunned. How could she not tell me about such a big thing? Wait, 2 weeks ago, that means, shortly after we returned from our honeymoon, she was already pregnant. I suddenly recalled those days when my wife was sharing meals and living with Xie Chang. I felt both angry and humiliated when the door opened. What are you doing with my phone without my permission? My wife snatched the phone from my hands, unhappy. I didn't let go. Instead, I zoomed in on the photo and held it up in front of her, my eyes wide with rage. And you still say you didn't have a relationship with Xie Chang? With the picture as proof, there was no way for her to escape this time. However, my wife insisted that it was mine. Since we returned from the honeymoon, I haven't touched you. Can you think before you lie? I was so angry that my veins were popping out. Li Ming, do you only remember the honeymoon and forget everything before it? Let me tell you one last time, this is your child. My head was spinning. We had relations before my trip abroad, which means it's possible that the test could show 2 lines now. I asked the most crucial question. If it's mine, why didn't you tell me right away when you found out you were pregnant? Hearing this, my wife's gaze flickered for a moment and she muttered, "You've been coming home late these days. Whether it's for socializing or other things, I wanted to wait until it was more stable and then give you a surprise." As she spoke, she started to cry in grievance. I became the unreasonable one. My emotions were a tangled mess, and the more I tried to untangle them, the more confused I became. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have doubted you, my wife." I suppressed the irritation in my heart and wanted to hug her and comfort her, but she pushed away. My wife turned around and retrieved another set of bedding to go sleep on the side. Tonight we parted on bad terms. All night long, I tossed and turned, repeatedly thinking about my marriage. There's no substantial evidence to prove that my wife has cheated. She is still pregnant. Perhaps I should let go of my prejudices and reconcile with my wife. So, after work, I stopped making excuses to avoid going home and actively participated in household chores. I washed vegetables and cooked, spent weekends shopping with my wife, and even bought a lot of baby supplies. My wife forgave me for my impulsiveness that night, and our little home regained the sweetness of our newlywed days. Meanwhile, I eagerly anticipated the arrival of the baby. However, fate threw a wrench in my plans, as a mysterious recording shattered all my hopes for the marriage, leaving not a single fragment. This recording ripped apart the facade my wife had maintained for so long in front of me. All this time, I had been like a fool, completely oblivious, trusting my wife unconditionally. How ridiculous! Filled with rage, I even thought about confronting my wife directly with the recording, but the experiences from the last 2 times constantly reminded me not to do that. I managed to suppress my impulse, force myself to calm down and strategize my response. Having been played one too many times, I was disillusioned with this marriage and now just wanted to quickly end things with my wife and return to normalcy. Suddenly, a fleeting thought crossed my mind, and I had a rough plan forming. On Saturday morning, I pretended I needed to take her somewhere. Thankfully, my wife didn't suspect anything. When the car stopped at the hospital entrance, my wife's beautiful eyes flashed with a hint of panic as she awkwardly asked why we were here. "Dear, my company gave me a free physical checkup, and since you're pregnant now, you need to have regular checkups." Hearing my words, my wife instinctively tightened her grip on her purse, her fingertips turning white. I saw everything and couldn't help but smirk inside. "Since it's still early, I don't think I need to. I can come another day by myself." My wife laughed awkwardly, trying to find excuses to back out, but I wouldn't let her have her way. I took out my phone and showed her the conversation with the gynecologist, very sincerely saying, "No, the doctor said it's even more important to have an early checkup." Almost dragging her along, I ignored my wife's protests and pulled her straight to the obstetrics and gynecology department. I had already made an appointment online, specifically requesting an ultrasound, as a color ultrasound is clearer than a pregnancy test and can determine the gestational age of the baby. When the time comes, I want to see what my wife has to say. I personally saw my wife enter the color ultrasound room. In less than 10 minutes, she came out pale, her head down as if she couldn't bear to look at me. Her reaction said it all. The ultrasound results came out quickly. When I thought of my wife's name, I rushed to the ultrasound room faster than she did. The doctor handed me the results, looking a bit confused. "It hasn't even been a month. The gestational sac is too small to see clearly. The gestational age was under 4 weeks. Ha, the child clearly isn't mine." I held up the ultrasound film and turned to my wife and said, "The child is Xie Chang's." A firm statement. My wife's gaze shifted from my indifferent face to the ultrasound results in her hands, her face instantly losing color. Concrete evidence made lying and arguing futile. Honey, it's not what you think. I'm innocent, please believe me." My wife staggered, grabbing my hand to explain. Innocent? She cheated behind my back and still considered herself innocent. It felt like the biggest joke ever. I shook off her clingy hands, and any sympathy I had vanished. "The one being unfaithful is you. How dare you claim to be innocent?" I really didn't want to say more to her. People in the hospital were coming and going. Our commotion had attracted attention. They looked over with curiosity and barely concealed gossip. With so many people watching, I didn't want to stay there a second longer, so I turned to leave. Suddenly, I heard a bang, the crisp sound of someone kneeling on the floor. My wife, disregarding the crowd, clung to my leg, sobbing uncontrollably. "Xie Chang got drunk and forced me. I couldn't resist, and I was afraid you'd find out and leave me. Honey, I didn't willingly have relations with him. Please forgive me this time." She cried pitifully, like a flower drenched in rain, while onlookers pointed and whispered about me. "A big man like him doesn't have that much tolerance. He can only shout at women." Yeah, that woman seems pitiful, forced into it while her husband talks about divorce. Good to leave, there are plenty of men like him. The whispers of the crowd reached my ears, almost siding with my wife, blaming me for everything. What a farce, being betrayed and yet becoming the target of scorn. "I'll ask you one last time. You were forced by Xie Chang to have relations, is that right?" I leaned down to look my wife in the eyes, giving her one final chance. She nodded without hesitation. Since that's the case, I took out my phone and opened that recording from my email. As I played it, I turned up the volume intentionally. I don't want to take medication anymore. Whose child it is, I'll leave it to fate. It was clearly my wife's voice. The expressions on the faces of the spectators were varied and stunning, shock and disbelief written all over them. My wife was frozen in place, her eyes vacant as she sat down on the ground, utterly disheveled. I brushed off the imaginary dust on my pants, satisfied as I walked away. My wife firmly disagreed with the divorce and even brought her parents over to persuade me, along with relatives from her side of the family. She said she was willing to terminate the pregnancy, cut off contact with Xie Chang, and live a good life with me. Without a second thought, I rejected her. After going through all this, I could no longer believe every word she said. I moved out of our new house, took the evidence of my wife's affair, and filed for divorce. During the lawsuit, Xie Chang came to find me with his wife. They somehow got my address and blocked me at my door like 2 gatekeepers. "Li Ming, you and Zhong Yao were married. Can't you negotiate a divorce privately instead of dragging it to court?" Xie Chang said, his face dark with irritation. I was almost laughing out of anger. Our marital issues, did they really require his unsolicited advice? What gives you the right to say these things? The homewrecker? I mocked him mercilessly. Xie Chang's expression changed instantly, and he pulled his wife closer to him as if to assert his ownership. "After your divorce is finalized, I will marry Zhong Yao and take good care of her and the child. I glanced at my wife, who had been silent but had a slight baby bump. No wonder they were in such a hurry to get married. Fine. I'll have my lawyer draft a divorce agreement. The house and car stay with me. I won't touch your assets. Before I could finish, Xie Chang, furious, interrupted. Why should the house and car belong to you? Zhong Yao's name is on the title. She has half a claim. Seeing this, my wife looked up at me with hopeful eyes. I paid for the house, and my family covered most of the renovation costs. I bought the car. Think about whether it should belong to me. I could only feel speechless. She's your wife. It's expected that you provide her with a car and a home. Taking them back after divorce doesn't make you a man, Li Ming. Xie Chang's shamelessness was beyond my expectations. Talking to him was nothing but an insult to my intelligence. Ignoring the furious Xie Chang, I warned him that if he harassed me again, I would call the police, and ultimately, I called security to get them removed from my premises. For a while after that, Xie Chang stopped coming to see me. The divorce proceedings continued as scheduled. Since my wife's affair had led to her pregnancy, she was deemed the party at fault. With Zhu Hao's assistance, I successfully secured ownership of the house and the car. However, the dowry of 200,000 yuan and a third of the assets were non-recoverable. After everything concluded, 5 months had passed. I had emerged from the failed marriage, owning a house and a car, free from any dramatic emotional entanglements, and felt light as a feather. The next time I heard about my ex-wife was at a friend's gathering. Zhong Yao's husband is really a piece of work, Tizke. Zhu Hao carefully observed my expression. Seeing me unaffected, he mysteriously showed me a video from the day Zhong Yao remarried. In the video, a drunken Xie Chang was cursing and pointing at my ex-wife's face in mockery. You better not give me any attitude, and how dare you ask for the dowry? Go find out who would want to marry you. My ex-wife, who was never one to take things lying down, shot back. Xie Chang, you jerk. I've seen your true colors. If it weren't for your interference, I wouldn't have divorced. Xie Chang seemed provoked and slapped my ex-wife twice, leaving immediate red marks on her face. Who are you to act righteous? You seduced me and I have the video. Want me to show everyone? Xie Chang spat as he spoke, his hands rummaging through his suit as if looking for his phone. Watching my ex-wife's beautiful face twist in anger as she yelled and pulled at Xie Chang was painful. The sounds of curses, gasps, and crying filled my ears, overwhelming me with noise. In the scuffle, my ex-wife bumped into a table full of food and fell to the ground. Blood gushed from her lower body, staining her wedding dress red. The video abruptly cut off. This caused quite a stir. It made the city news. TSK, Zhong Yao's husband seems to have been detained. Zhu Hao and the others sighed. The video of my ex-wife's remarriage went viral, and the uproar became common knowledge. Not only did my ex-wife's relatives lose face, but Xie Chang, labeled an abuser, had to hide in shame. I quietly took a sip of my drink. Whose fault was it for their current predicament? It was all just karma. Unexpectedly, this drama had a sequel. Littling, Aunt, can I ask you for a favor? Please see Zhong Yao just once. My former mother-in-law stood at my company, crying her eyes out. At a loss for words, I hesitated before responding to such a request. Then my mother-in-law dropped an even heavier bombshell. My ex-wife lost the baby during that argument. The fetus had already formed after more than 5 months, and she lost the chance to be a mother. Zhong Yao and Xie Chang became enemies, each accusing the other of intentional harm, determined to send Xie Chang to prison. Xie Chang was no saint either, threatening my ex-wife to withdraw her lawsuit. If she didn't, he would release her private videos online. As a result, my ex-wife's private video spread online. Just when one wave receded, another emerged. Netizens traced her address and phone number, subjecting her to relentless insults and slanders. The situation unfolded completely beyond my expectations. Aunt knows you've divorced. It was Zhong Yao's fault. It's not your blame. I beg you to see her just once. I'm afraid for that child. She hasn't eaten or drunk anything for days. If something happens to her, we wouldn't want to live anymore. Under the public gaze, my tearful mother-in-law was about to kneel, all to persuade me to meet my ex-wife. This will be the last time. Considering our past relationship, I went to the hospital where my ex-wife was staying. After not seeing her for days, she was a shadow of the person from the video, almost unrecognizable. She lay frail on the hospital bed, her eyes dull, devoid of life. "You're still willing to see me?" Upon seeing me, my ex-wife murmured in disbelief. Tears slipped from her eyes. "What happened? Weren't you getting married?" I asked, voicing my confusion. Xie Chang had been attentive to her before. How had he turned his back so quickly? When my ex-wife heard this, she cried even harder. "He gambled, took my money to gamble and lost it all. My parents asked him for the 50,000 yuan dowry, but then she had poured her heart into marrying Xie Chang, going against her family's wishes and investing her savings, only to end up in this situation. Her reputation was ruined, her child lost, and her money vanished. When people mentioned her, they whispered about her as if she were the star of a scandal. Even her family members were made fun of behind their backs. I quietly listened to her finish, stayed a while longer, then stood up to leave. Just before I left, I heard my ex-wife whisper an apology. After exiting the hospital room, the autumn rain that had poured for days finally paused, and the sky began to clear. Suddenly, I felt a sense of relief. What was a failed marriage in the grand scheme of life? I believed there were better women waiting for me in the future, and most importantly, they wouldn't have so-called male best friends.